There are different kinds of animals, all kinds of animals, and they have different traits. Now, once they've been wounded and cornered, a pig will squeal, but a tiger will charge. Which are you?
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Leveraging is something you were saying a few minutes ago about the conflict of interests of collectivist people in power who shore up their own power through creating these systems and structures that seem to perpetuate and expand their own need for them to be interfering in people's lives. Wanted to turn around and look at it from the other side. Often you hear the term prepper as almost a laugh line or a caricature, someone who's kind of wild-eyed and always talking about conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. Certainly not a reasonable person. And in this channel, we've talked with a lot of very level-headed, reasonable folks who yet feel that it improves the strength of families and also of communities for people to have a preparedness, a readiness, self-sufficiency, self-reliance. And I'd like to turn the discussion around that is, instead of being increasingly dependent upon these collectivist systems, what are the characteristics of a well-prepared community, and how does prepping strengthen communities?
Well, first of all, I'd like to share your viewpoint on the word prepper. I mean, to me, a person who is a prepper in the broadest sense is a very sensible and intelligent person. I can't think of many people that don't have insurance of some kind or another, which means that they're preppers. They're prepared for, as best they can, they're prepared for their house to burn down, even though they don't expect it to. They're prepared. You buy insurance on your car. If you total the car, they don't expect to total the car, but if they do, they're prepared. Preparation is a very intelligent thing to participate in your life.
When I was a child, my dad talked to me about his childhood as a Boy Scout, and my older brother was an Eagle Scout, and I became a Boy Scout. And of course, the motto of the Boy Scouts of America is "Be prepared." So there's another vote in that direction.
Yeah, it just makes sense. And so, obviously, when people use the prepper with a sneer in their voice, they're just trying to cast aspersions on somebody with whom they disagree. That's all. And let's face it for what it is. Actually, preparation for adversity is a very intelligent thing to do. It's American in a way, in that traditionally Americans have been very independent people. They didn't depend on their neighbor. They depended perhaps on their family, but they tried not to depend on their neighbor, and they sure as shooting didn't want to depend on the government, because they didn't trust those government people. Well, that was a long time ago. Now it's the other way around. People think, well, I pay my taxes, don't I? I'm entitled to, be taken care of by the government because I paid my share. So, the old saying, if you depend on somebody for your livelihood, for your income, for your food, your shelter, your clothing, your education, your health care, payment on your house and everything, if you depend on somebody for those things, you better do what they say, because they can cut you off, and then where are you? You're completely a servant of those on whom you depend. So preparing, no matter what level you look at it, it just makes sense to me, but especially from a philosophical or an ideological point of view, if you want to be independent of all of these suede shoe politicians, these con artists that are holding political office, if you want to be independent of them and their agendas and their cronyism, then they're stealing money from you to fatten their own pockets and the pockets of their buddies. You know that. If you want to be independent as much as possible from that, well, then how about thinking of yourself as a prepper? And then we look around us. I mean, there's so many things that could happen that would sever us, even even if these things I've been saying are not true, if we lived in a perfectly honest and tranquil society, there are things that can happen. There can be natural disasters. I'm particularly aware of one now that I hadn't really thought about until fairly recently, and that is the inevitability, not possibility, not even probability, but the inevitability of a massive solar storm that is so much larger than anything we have seen in our lifetime, because we know they have happened before on this earth. These X-class solar flares, mega classes, I mean, they could be 100 or 1,000 times stronger than the one that we call the Carrington event, which was 155 years ago. Anyway, we know that these mega storms come along every 150 years on average. The last one was 155 years ago, which means statistically we're already overdue. And when one happens, they're going to knock out all of the transformers, the main big transformers at the power stations. They are not prepared. And when those things burn up, it'll take an average of 2 years to replace them. And since they all need to be replaced at once, they probably would take longer than 2 years. And that's assuming that the companies that are building these transformers themselves have power, which is not a good assumption. In other words, this thing could throw us back 20 years without electricity. Just think about that. Most people go nuts after 5 days without electricity. It's a major catastrophe. Think about a couple of months or a couple of years. Okay, my role is not to scare anybody, but these are realities. And if you don't think about them and think, maybe I ought to have a little bit of drinkable water in my basement or in my attic or something, you're stupid. So I'm just trying to reinforce your opinion here. I think that the idea of being a prepper is not something to be sneered at, but it's something to be admired.
And from a community standpoint, a couple aspects of that. One is that when you've seen whether it's man-made or natural disasters affecting areas, you see images of riots and looting and people in desperate situations. It can be a humanitarian crisis, and it seems that that's in some ways quite preventable from people taking initiative while they still can to make preparedness to be able to support their families. And the other aspect of that is in communities. You mentioned sort of that fierce American independence, and yet we're seeing more evidence of interdependent food production, people forming rich, mutually supportive networks of local food producers and local people with skills who can repair things, and this whole go local movement about just keeping more within the local community of the fruits of the labor of the people who live there and work there. It's not, I say we're seeing more of it because I think there are certain areas which are exhibiting it more than others, certain states and certain locales, but it's kind of a countercurrent to the overall megatrend of people becoming increasingly essentially helpless and dependent upon large urban supply chains and that sort of thing to sustain their life.
Yeah, it is countercurrent, definitely, and that's the sad part, because it needs to be main current. People who are not prepared in any way at all to deal with these things that we're talking about are probably not going to make it. They're not going to make it. It's going to be one of the casualties, and that's sad. And it's doubly sad because you think of how many people are stacked on top of each other in these high-rise apartment buildings, and here we are talking about becoming food independent, growing your own food, and so forth. Well, this becomes a real, almost an impossibility for so many people, and it's sad. And I don't know what the answer is. I know that the people are working diligently on the kinds of food production that could actually work even in apartment environments, but I don't know how long that would last, especially if you can't get water. If the water's shut off, even hydroponics need water. So it's a dilemma. I don't know what the answer is on that.
And I'm interested in how this has changed. You're older than I am, but my parents talked about having lived through the Depression and the Second World War, and the concept of a victory garden promoted as a patriotic thing to do during the Second World War, whereas I've mentioned in other interviews here that we live in an area where the Homeowners Association explicitly forbids gardening through our deed restrictions, so we can't even garden if we want to. And so when did gardening become something that that somebody who is out of the mainstream would only want to participate in, rather than something that's considered beneficial to the society.
Yeah, well, it's only fairly recently. I have to say I am old enough. I do remember working in a victory garden as a kid. It wasn't my favorite task. It was Michigan, and the summertime, very hot there, and man, I got blisters on my fingers, pulling that hoe through the weeds and all that. I really didn't like it very much. But looking back on it, it was good for me, and it was something that everybody was doing. And even those of us that didn't like doing it, we were proud to be part of a constructive effort, and the food tasted pretty good. So, yeah, that was then. This is now. It's not at all the same. I don't know when that started, but I think probably it didn't surface until about the last eight or 9 years. I don't remember reading in the newspaper where people were being threatened with jail time for growing tomatoes in their front yard because it was unsightly and had violated some kind of an ordinance. I don't remember that until about 8 or 9 years ago. But anyway, all that can be changed if we just get off of our couches and get down to City Hall and not only register our voices there at City Hall, but start running for positions on the City Council. And one of our mottos in Freedom Force is that don't fight City Hall, become City Hall. And therein lies a great solution to these problems. We have to start taking an active role in not just being responsive, reactive, but becoming proactive. We have to start running for positions of authority so that we can change those ordinances back to where they should be, and have a little bit of power in the power centers that I was talking about before.
So your work in that area is inspiring, because I think that's another key. One of the myths of the prepper movement is that it's all about isolationism and bunker mentality and people going off and just being an army of one all by themselves. And that's not at all what I see from the people that we've talked with and the people we meet. Is they're intensely interested in a rich relationships with other like-minded folks who are trying to basically wake up from this bad dream that we've been in for the last generation or and a half or so, and to help each other out, to teach each other the lost arts of growing food successfully and effectively and that sort of thing, and repairing things and taking good care of each other. And so it sounds like the vision that you share is one of hope and of collaboration, but based on common sense recognition of the rights of the individual families, and that we need to make sure that the rules we set up are support the families and support our fairness, and don't just get us back into this collectivist being robbed by the power system. So we just thank you for the work that you've done in that area, and anyone who wants to find out more about it sounds like going to realityzone.com and Freedom Force International. That comes right up when you search for it. And before we let you go, Mr. Griffin, is there any other thoughts either on the topic of the Federal Reserve and how we rise above the theft that we're subject to under that system, or on this second topic of why prepping is actually patriotic, why it's good for communities?
Well, it's hard to find a closing theme that touches both of those, but I suppose that there is one, and that's more of an internal view. In other words, our attitude. What is our attitude about all of these problems? We could have talked about a lot of others as well. And I think that the attitude that we're trying to make attractive is one of independence, one of being responsible and taking the initiative, and don't just sit around and whine and complain, but to do something about it. And certainly do more than worry. If I was driving down the road the other day and I had this mental picture of somebody saying, Mr. G, well, what are you going to do about it? I hear this all the time. What are you going to do? Well, they got all the power and we're just one person can't do anything. And I pictured myself standing up and heroically stating, hey, wait a minute, I was going to say in my mind, of course, there are different kinds of animals, all kinds of animals, and they have different traits. Now, once they've been wounded and cornered, a pig will squeal, but a tiger will charge. Which are you?
Thank you, G. Edward Griffin, for joining us, for your words of encouragement and of vision, and for your hard work that we would like to find out more about. Any of our listeners who want to find out more about it, happy to join you at Freedom Force International and realityzone.com. And just thank you for spending your time here with us on Reluctant Preppers again.
Okay, thank you, Donegan. Much appreciated.